Welcome to the Poetry Box Live. I'm Shawn Aveningo-Sanders, and we're so happy that you could join us today. For those of you who may be joining us for the first time, my husband Robert and I run an independent press here in Portland, Oregon, known as the Poetry Box. And to help support our authors reach a broader audience, we host the Poetry Box Live on the second Saturday of each month. We publish about 25 to 30 poetry books per year, plus our annual journal, The Poeming Pigeon. And for today's show, we have three delightful poets who will be reading from their new books. Today's features poets include Nathan Fryback from here in Beaverton, Oregon, Tara Carnes, who will be joining us from Texas, and John Miller, who's also joining us from Oregon. Let's get started with our first featured reader. Nathan Fryback is the author of Shells and the Sieve, poems that express the power of place amidst constant change and the search for grace in the human endeavor. Nathan is a native Oregonian who developed an interest in writing when he was 13. Later, while attending college in Eugene, he found a second passion, artisan baking, which led him to his career at a little bakery in Northwest Portland. With a strong connection to family, he draws from them for his sense of self and outlook on life, which has proved inspiration for his writing. Shells and the Sieve is his first published chapbook. Please welcome Nathan Fryback.
Hi, everybody. It's an honor to be here. I'm thrilled to be here and participating in this. Really thankful to Shawn for putting this all together and developing the press that she's got going and the good things she's doing for new writers. And it's really exciting to be a part of it. I'm going to start reading from my book. I've picked out a few entries that I like and thought would be good to read today. The first one is titled Any Street in Portland, Oregon. Walking through the homeless camps in wedded bliss go pride and folly, along corridors of blue tarpaulin, so that a vaporous discontent settles about every set of shoulders and fills every stomach. Tomorrow, tomorrow, there's always tomorrow. Someone put vinyl flowers in a beer can and set it on the curb, hoping home is where the heart is. Everything else is shades of gray. Glimpses of what could have been dart about the shadows and tug at the peripheral vision of every occupant. In the land of dimming dreams, another day is swallowed by the night, and the cold winter stars shine all the brighter. And that I picked up. I actually had to walk through a few homeless camps on my way to work. And I work early in the mornings, and so I get a chance to see some of the creatures of the night, and can be a little intimidating sometimes, but the struggles that they go through and endeavors that they experience in society are inspiring to me. And so I thought I'd share that. The second piece I'm going to share is called Relics. And I have a deep connection to my family and my place in Oregon. And so a lot of those things kind of weave their way through my writing. This is one of them. Relics. A burl of myrtle wood from Pistol River that was turned on a lathe and lined with cork sat on my granddad's mantle. He would lift its fitted lid and let rest his elbow there, draw his dried tobacco from inside, flannel sleeves rolled up. His lit matches would flame out like tiny meteors above a hearth-shaped earth. He'd play cribbage and smoke on the patio. At his wake, we stirred in quiet groups and took him in. I stood by the rug my aunt and I once built card houses on, but didn't cry. The swirling grain of the tobacco jar turned waves across its brawny face and made me think of the sea. Grandma let me take it, still airtight and not a scratch. In the corners and dimples of the cork was his blend, dried past dry, but pungent. I need only close my eyes in repose to conjure that scent now, and it's always passed around when he's thought of, which makes it stronger still. That's an actual piece of furniture in my house now, that tobacco jar. Very important part of my family history. So it's inspiring to have it around and see it. Definitely reminds me of my grandfather. The third piece I'm going to read is kind of a whimsical piece inspired by my son, who wasn't always the best sleeper. And so I wrote a little story about dreams, and it's called Tales from the Dream Bin. The dream bin overflowed and spilled all over the boy's room. Pirate ships, bike accidents, and girls laughing pooled around his bedposts. Having no meaningful sleep night after night, his dreams went undreamt, instead swirling and sloshing amongst things that could be held and understood. While he was at school, they grew, feeding off each other, unable to reclaim purchase back inside a box with walls. All they wanted was a turn through his mind. In time, they will drown him, forcing their way into his veins and then his heart, fighting to be a part of what makes him whole. They will bring him to his knees. Those undreams weave together to become an entire life lived on the other side of something real, living as a snake with sleep as its venom. And then, thank you. Let's see, the fourth piece I'd like to share is another piece about my family history. I grew up, I was born on a small farm in Southern Oregon on the Willamette Valley, in the Rogue Valley, I'm sorry. And this is a poem about that farm. The title is Turning of the Hourglass. Somewhere along this strand of barbed wire, there's a gate. This rutted road all looks the same. Every 50 paces is an oak stump on the pasture side. The carcass of a tractor sprouts brambles from its chassis, where flickers, juncos, and mice now appreciate its stationariness. It's all just cobwebs on the land. Ed Mueller used one of those tree's limbs to block and tackle an engine out of an old Model A. The tree is long gone, but the axles and drivetrain, there they sit, drenched in rust. Our aunts would sit in the kitchen, talk about food, becoming mothers, and things that were better, stuffing blackberries from the river into pies. But the past isn't past, it's right here. That same hot wind still rolls down the Siskiyous every June and curls through the barn, pushing and pulling straw across the floor. The lives of those that walk this farm live on, of the land. They walk with me now and draw breath through my memories. Change happens through time, but the past, present, and future sit comfortably within each other. My father told me, and I told my sons to tell their children the same. Change touches everything. It is how we learn to say the things we cannot say. And there is a piece that I wrote that's about thoughts. And of course, as a writer, I'm constantly having thoughts and trying to come up with things to write about. And this is sort of an attempt at that eventually came out to be a full piece. And it's called Alluvia. Just a few thoughts put down on paper and shuffled away. Maybe it's a list or a love letter or a recipe for enchiladas, and it gets obscured by magazines or mail or buried in an avalanche. Maybe an archaeologist sees it next, or it's put into a rocket and fired into space or into a recycle bin. The act of having the thought puts it into the realm of existent things. In an instant, its imprint is stitched into the fundament, and there it stays, subject to the influence of every other thought, to take on meaning or depth beyond that intended by the thinker. While we live our lives, the thoughts find each other, work on each other. What is shaped is the fountain from which true mindfulness comes back into the fold, refined, embellished, and available for contemplation. Jotted down on a scrap of paper, whispered into a lover's ear, or etched into stone, it's the thought that counts. And the last piece I'd like to share is called Stranded. And I've lived in Beaverton for a little while now, and I live for a couple of years ago, I lived in an area where there was apartment complexes and office complexes, and there wasn't very many businesses or sort of quaint shops or anything. And so it was kind of a sterile environment. And one day I saw this empty shopping cart sitting in the office building parking lot, and it really stuck out to me. So I wrote about it, and it's called Stranded. An empty grocery cart in an empty office building parking lot is the loneliest sort of grocery cart there is. Room to carry, but with nothing. Its wheels have forgotten how to hiss through rows of perfect linoleum tiles and pass its own kind in use, freshly sanitized handles and filled to their brims. The pusher that guided it, the one that guided it here, marooned it, tied its lead to a glass and metal island and swam off alone, their load light enough for pockets, and left it like the gutted hull of a ship without a grocery store for miles. Today is Sunday, and tomorrow people who require more than 3 cubic feet of space to hold their lives will not recognize it as a life raft and have it taken away. Maybe it will go into the landfill or get melted down and changed into something that belongs in an empty office building parking lot. Or if its wheels still turn, be ferried back to the store it was set adrift from, to cruise the fluorescent aisles and teem with provisions once again. Now nearly dusk and slated for at least another night under the stars, this grocery cart starts to blur the line between being lonely and being alone. So, thank you. And do I have time for one more? Okay. This one is a really special one. This one is about my grandfather, who was a logger, and he was a very important person in my life. And I grew up with him as a big part of my life. And so his actions and the things that took place in his life have a big influence on me. And this one's called Talisman. The grandpa I knew used a plumb bob. He was a timber faller. It's a lead weight on an 18-inch chain that you carry in your pocket. You draw it out on a hillside, hold it at arm's length, and close one eye. A tree's angle relative to the chain determines the likelihood of your death if you cut it from this side or from that side. Then you light a cigarette. I have that chain and weight in a box on a shelf. I remember the first time I wanted to be grown up was in the bed of his 1970 Chevy C10, trying to keep that plumb bob from swinging all the way back to town. It was coated in dust and pitch. My grandpa smelled like leaded gasoline, drove to work on gravel roads, and was most content in exhaustion. His work warped his body into scarred knots, turned his hands into catcher's mitts. The dents in his hard hat were not for show. If I slept on the couch, I could see him in the dark kitchen filling a giant green thermos, red-topped socks, and waxed canvas pants that could stand without anybody in them. At night would barely be finished when he drove into the hills. In summer, we could go with him, but only if we played in the road. I could build the Rocky Mountains with Tonka trucks and gravel by lunch. Out of sight, but still close enough to feel a tree hit the ground. The plumb bob was kept in his zippered breast pocket. When he passed, Grandma said to come and take his things, if you want any of it. There's tools and a rifle, boots, and 4 crab pots. I sold his truck to Dale Ryman. I only wanted 2 things, the schoolhouse clock from his shop and the plumb bob. It was still tacky with pitch and smelled like a hot day in the Siskiyou Mountains. It was in the pocket with a zipper. It hangs bolt straight in my adult life and can split me like a prism, taking in a beam of one memory on one side and emitting every true colored thing I have learned out the other. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes, I appreciate that. Let's see, I'll read one more. This one's called From the Mouths of Babes. This also has a lot to do with my being a parent and chasing my kids around the playground and using our imaginations. From the Mouths of Babes. We are at the playground, drawing bison and antelope on the cave walls. In 10,000 years, they will come and wonder how we hunted. You could etch the mark for each of us, and they might think there was a war. They'll find the bones first anyway. From a million fires, a culture encoded in a carbon-scoured sky is now spread amongst the stars. Let's leave this bottle cap to throw them off. While they map the ocean floor, we could still be running barefoot through the stream. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. That
Thank
was
you.
lovely. Your book is just such a wonderful collection.
Thank you.
You know, one of my favorite poems, and there's so many, but I love the one about if the bridge had a heart.
Mm.
And it's very clear through your poetry that you have a huge heart.
Oh,
And
thank you.
it certainly shows up in your writing. And so just thank you so much for sharing your poetry with us
Thank you.
today. And thanks for sharing the detail of, is it your father's or your grandfather's tobacco jar?
Yes.
I have one that was my grandpa's. He smoked a pipe, and I can still open that jar every once in a while and just smell the cherry tobacco, and it just
Amazing.
takes me back to my childhood. It's like one of my favorite possessions. So
It does.
it's magical the way objects hold those memories for us.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing.
Thank you so much.
Okay, our next featured poet is going to be Tara Carnes, who is the author of a new poetry collection, Built to Last, where she takes a fearless look at domestic violence. Tara Carnes is a musician, writer, teacher, and spiritual director. She has an MA from the University of North Texas and spent over 30 years working as a music educator and church musician. In 2012, as part of her coursework for the Haden Institute Spiritual Direction program, she began writing poetry. Tara's poetry has appeared in Snapdragon, a journal of art and healing, Sage Woman, Chola Needles, The Poeming Pigeon, and The Very Edge Poems. She lives in Texas with her daughter and their handsome plush tuxedo cat, Orion. Please welcome Tara Carnes.
Hello, everybody. It's so nice to be here with this community of poets and poetry lovers. I'm going to read from a script, so I hope that doesn't sound too rehearsed, but it keeps me, I have my timing down so that I don't run over. So during the pandemic, I sent off a couple of my chapbooks for submission and was really pleased that the poetry box picked up Built to Last. And the poetry book, like Shawn had talked about, deals with domestic violence. And domestic violence is a depressingly common issue, but this poetry collection uses the voices of many survivors to take a fearless look at domestic violence and the support systems that make it possible to heal from this trauma. On average, 24 people per minute are victims of rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner in the United States. That's more than 12 million women and men over the course of a year. The first poem I would like to share is entitled Seize Candies, and it speaks about the denial and magical thinking it takes to stay in an abusive situation. Observers witnessing the abuse say, "Why do they stay?" A victim cannot admit the abuse to another person or ask for help until they first admit it to themselves. It is a long process before a victim can face the fact that the person who is supposed to love them the most is actually terrifying them and hurting them. Seize candies. I clean the floor and hear above me the doctor's heels clicking as she readies for work. She stopped by yesterday with a box of Seize candies, her phone number taped on top. She hears what is going on. Do you need help? I didn't realize she might have heard me crying and crying in the unfinished nursery, or throwing up when his car drives in because I am so scared. I know now she must have heard him screaming, "Fat bitch, stupid cow," slamming me into the walls. With my huge pregnant belly, I crawl around, scrubbing hardwood floors on hands and knees, hoping that maybe he won't get mad today. If the floor shines, the trash is not too full. His shirt hangers are spaced evenly apart, and I cooked the right meal. The next two poems speak about support systems that make it possible to heal from this trauma. In the Celtic spiritual tradition, an Anam Cara, or soul friend, is one who walks with you on your spiritual journey. Spiritual directors are often called Anam Caras. They use deep listening to encourage the spiritual story of the other to unfurl. Through this relationship, the person seeking companionship is empowered to explore a deeper experience of God, the creator, or however you may refer to the ground of all being, and at the same time enjoy a deeper experience of their own lives. Anamkara. Everything is going to be okay, you said, as you touched my hand. I am surprised. No one has ever told me that. Not after they hear about my situation. Most, in fact, avoid talking about it. I wonder what kind of things you have experienced since my story doesn't seem to scare you off. Weeks, months, years, we talk. When I feel trapped and hopeless, you tell me I have the power to choose. Choose to run away, choose to stay and fight. I stay and you stay, accompanying me in the darkness, sharing your wisdom and faith, awakening my strength. Thank you. A found family can provide a great deal of support for someone trapped in domestic violence. The divine sends friends, family, neighbors, and coworkers, and other found family. My poem, Fire and Gasoline, celebrates the laughter and the strength that such a wonderful friendship can offer. Fire and gasoline. My ex raged to the judge, said my best friend and I were like fire and gasoline when we were together. Explosive, dangerous, unstable. My ex really hated that she gave me hope, courage, strength to leave our abusive situation, to move far away from him. Before we left, our girls' night out group had a going away party, posed for pics wearing tees printed up with the words fire and gasoline. Thank you. Let me give you a little background for the next poem. While having coffee one morning with the art teacher at school, I shared the latest names my ex had called me. I was feeling really defeated. She said, wait a minute, and went to her classroom. She returned with a printed picture of a Weeble family and said, tape this to your mirror so you see it every day. Weebles are strong and they don't stay down no matter what. She really helped me reframe how I felt about being called a Weeble and to own it. I then decided to make a heroes collage poster of people that inspired me. And later on, I wrote this poem about the experience. A side note, I still keep adding people to this collage. The latest one is the Ukrainian woman who knocked the Russian spy drone out of the sky by throwing canned tomatoes at it. She was pretty inspiring. And during the pandemic, I bought a Weeble to keep on my desk for inspiration. It's a tarot Weeble. It's got brown hair, a big bottom, and a cat for a cat lady. But they don't fall down. My ex sent me a drunken email at 2:08 a.m. and copied our judge. He called me a Weeble, among other things, for my refusal to stay down after repeated legal punches. I printed a picture of Weebles and glued it to my heroes poster collage, where Gandhi walks, Rosa Parks sits, Malala speaks, Mother Teresa touches, Corrie ten Boom hides, MLK marches, Sacagawea leads, Joan of Arc charges, Hildegard sings, Nelson Mandela forgives, Crazy Horse fights, Julian of Norwich guides, Philippine Duchenne teaches, Joan Chittister preaches, Arab Spring protesters shout, Burmese monks challenge, DC Mayor Bowser paints Black Lives Matter. and a lone Chinese student stares down a tank in Tiananmen Square. Thank you. The last poem I want to share with you is also the title of my chapbook, Built to Last. It begins with a quote by the 14th century Persian poet Hafiz. "The words you speak become the house you live in. The words you speak become the house you live in." When we change the negative talk soundtrack of the inner critic that plays on a continuous loop in our heads, we can improve both our physical and psychological well-being and give us a more positive outlook on the future. Built to last. I took the disparaging words others had flung at me, repeated and repeated them, made them my own. Built this house of selfdom, a brittle shell scraped and dented by these internal voices. The shingles took a beating of rapid fire hateful words, fat bitch, stupid cow, which seeped in and dripped down the rafters into a dark, spidery pool of untold stories and secrets. Moldy wisps of mutters and sighs repeat, "You are unlovable." Half-rotted stair steps alternate, stupid ugly, stupid ugly, stupid ugly, waiting to collapse my self-confidence. "You will never amount to anything," slithered in the murky sink water, unable to escape down the clogged drain. A weary ceiling fan whispered, "Now look what you've done," leaving undisturbed a thick layer of dusty, "You don't belong here." Closet doors stuffed with put-downs spilled out, "Wail, klutz, ugly, 4 eyes, loser." But when you know better, you do better. And with help, I struggled to stop this litany of self-hatred, this soundtrack of malice. I learned to put good thoughts out into the universe and look at myself in the mirror and say, "I love you." Slowly, slowly, an orange glow of hope bravely shone through the cracked, dirt-smeared windows of my soul. Mantras of "You belong here," "You deserve this," "You are loved," "You are beautiful," restored and updated this weathered and wise sanctuary. The bones of this abode now stand strong, a must-see remodel with an excellent view of the future. Thank you. And one last little thing I'd like to say. If you or someone you care for is experiencing domestic abuse, no matter their gender, do not hesitate to reach out to the National Domestic Violence Hotline. You can begin by visiting their website at thehotline.org or calling the 24/7 support line, 1-800-799-SAFE, and speak to an advocate dedicated and trained to help those in difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you, Tara, so much. First, let me tell you, you are beautiful. Thank you for your bravery in sharing these poems. And also thank you for all the work that I know you do to support women who may find themselves in similar situations. Now, more than ever, as women's rights are being challenged in the courts, it's imperative that we work to lift each other up. And that's exactly what your book is going to do for so many. So thank you so much for sharing, Tara. Our final poet is John Miller, author of Olympic, a collection of personal, persona, and pandemic poems inspired by Greek mythology. John is the founder of Portland Ars Poetica, a literary poetry collective serving the US Pacific Northwest and when virtual, anywhere. John has lived in Portland, Oregon since 2012, where he started to write poetry after a 20-year hiatus. A writer from as far back in childhood as he can remember, John was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. He wrote his first poem at 15 on the New York City subway before going on to earn his degree in English from Amherst College. John's poetry has been featured at the Elizabeth Jones Art Center's 2021 Festival of Feelings. His poetry has also appeared in West Trade Review, Tiny Seed Literary Journal, Wingless Dreamer, Wax Poetry and Art, Third Wednesday, River Heron Review, and many others. Please welcome John Miller.
Thank you so much, Shawn. Thank you very much to the Poetry Box. I noted today in the Oregonian's Literary News, this is listed as an event, and I wanted to share that as I passed a Rubicon. I was not a poet when I moved to the Pacific Northwest. Now I am not only a poet, but a published poet. And I have the Poetry Box to thank for that. So Olympic is notable for being poems entirely about Greek mythology. It's also a cycle of poems that was written inside the pandemic, right? Starting from very, very early on. I co-led and actually more like attended a series of salons hosted by my friend Rebecca Smolin on Zoom that focused on a different Greek god or goddess every session. So I wanted to share a selection of those poems with you today. I want to start with, and I'll go in the order that they appear in the book. And the order they appear in the book is actually the order that the gods or goddesses appear first in Robert Graves' The Greek Myths. So I'll start with a Diasia, which is a rite of spring. It was the festival of Zeus in the underworld, which involved actually cooking animals for sacrifice, but burning them so they were inedible. People were supposed to be hungry for a night and then welcome spring the next day. This is a Diasia. I hope I have this right. After fasting all day, there should be a feast. But that night, the animals burned whole to a charred husk of the inedible. It's the time of year, hunger that needs memory, lived experience, spirit as all want, indelible and worsened. The fire deepens through smoke, fumes, morning, the next day, where a silence bars every door. But inside there is bread or cake, tea that waits to settle despair. In warming noon air, consider the groom to a path, the stack to a wall, hills leveled or left to stand. For every victory, nothing happens without first working together. Carefully pouring one cup, giving that cup to one other, thirst that brings on the work of alliance. But before city or state, there must be a father, a mother. I am by no means a classicist. I actually had very little experience with the Greek myths before I encountered them in this cycle. This next poem is a persona poem about Aeneas, who was one of the heroes of the Trojan War. The image I carry is one of him carrying his father. So this is, and with an epigraph from Robert Graves, Aeneas proved a skilled fighter, and even Achilles did not disparage him. For if Hector was the hand of the Trojans, Aeneas was their soul. I can be a city father the way my father was just a man on a hill, until the bolt came down and made him, from me, some agent of history. Look around now, all the fallen and dead, the wrecked, the burning. I am still here. I run my hand over the scar from a spear that should have killed me. Or was it an arrow? I don't remember. And it's not the sky I look to for an answer. I just do somewhat what's told me, some of how I'm trusted, some that come spoken or gestured in dreams. I threaten to lose everything to war. What will endure past my time may not be up to me. And what is my time after the chase, the conniving, the stories that have me climbing to heaven? I am still here. My father had me in all the greatest pleasures. I have this world. I soften my gaze at the gray, taken back again to carrying him over my shoulder. Breathe in terror, evident in the fact of the sack of a city. What exactly is tomorrow? Ask again. Ask again. So I hope you can hear the pandemic in some of the tensions in this poem. The next one is Eris. Eris was a goddess of the unlikely. And the epigraph is, thereupon Zeus, aided by Eris, reversed the laws of nature, which hitherto had been immutable. The tree limb hangs by a wire, U-bolt anchored, rusted but strong. At a distance, it looks floating in space, taking languid turns in the early morning. The other limbs crack sap sent into the air, spills split on the neighbor's driveway, a lengthened canopy rich with needles, needles ending in tiny flowers. Their weight and rush of falling is what I slept through, as if a lightness, a secret, not a sizzling severed power line, not a smashed parked car. It required no lights and no sirens to come to, no startling awake, walking out to find disaster. Mislead me, faith. Make me think I need to thank for the near miss of a huge thing. And now that I read that aloud, there's allegory here too. I was fortunate, privileged, not to fall ill in the pandemic, but everything was happening all around. The next poem I wrote early on, and in fact, for this collection, I dated it, and it's the kind of famous, infamous myth of Demeter and Persephone. This is Demeter, April 2020. Demeter was so angry, this is the epigraph, Demeter was so angry that instead of returning to Olympus, she continued to wander about the earth, forbidding the trees to yield fruit and the herbs to grow until the race of men stood in danger of extinction. And wasn't that April 2020? I am here speaking on Demeter, on the creation of winter, which no longer has to do with the weather. Outside looks like the burgeoning of any spring, but I don't know if there was another abduction. We're here, and we're bargaining, and with so many already dead. Yes, they suffered, and they matter as much as her daughter, and so far your lot is indifferent as our world filled with sirens and crying out, with quiet resignation, with seething. It's all deafening, all this time waiting for a wrong kind of change to be made right. Is it to you, we ask? I am ready with fruit, with any red seed needed, if that's what needs. But I need to know about your Olympian conferences, your decisions, because our stories of you, those would die too. It's not a threat, it's real. That's how much this time is different. It's urgent, and I'm pleading, please. There's one other poem that I actually have come to enjoy reading aloud. Another dated poem. This is Circe, the Witch, from October of 2020, when I thought politics couldn't get any crazier. And the epigraph is, the goddess set a mess of cheese, barley, honey, and wine before the hungry sailors, but it was drugged. And no sooner had they begun to eat than she struck their shoulders with her wand and transformed them into hogs. Surely their rogues turned into animals. They are stuffed into good suits fit to their aging bodies. with close cropped haircuts, towel dried, combed over. They leave in the dark to come back in the dark, spending their hours in between in Congress or at the Capitol, under their bright lights, under the rutting of questioning, pronouncing confidence in smooth language daily. Look, if she's been around, she's been busy, turning leaders, voters, whole cities' menagerie. Where her spell ends, no one knows. There's a reason they once marooned her and hid her in the thickets of alder. She's out and about today where there are countries wide and flat, close to the size of continents. I mean, what is distance or millions, billions and elections, anticipating happening or beginning or ending to her weight of sadness, of rage, wandering and wanting, her fate a plaything, her never-mending heart carrying knowledge of love and never receiving it. And there were times in this cycle that I could find the personal in some of these stories. So this one is about me and my mom. And there's one word in Spanish here called it's tregua, which means surrender. So this is Hypnos. The epigraph is: Zeus awoke in a rage and threatened to cast sleep down from the upper air into the Gulf of Erebus. But she fled as a suppliant to night, whom even Zeus dared not displease. My mother tries to put me to sleep, leading by the hand into the room. Tregua, she says, suggesting a fatigue with living, rest for which only comes at the end. And what could I know at its beginning? She turns out one light, but not the other. Outside at a distance, a radio tower. It flashes a red beacon during the day, imperceptible, but at night. It faces me when in bed and blinks at me piercingly, demands something I cannot offer. I've asked through the window before falling into the cave, but I've never discerned an answer. It's so a plane won't crash into it, she told me once, and then the next breath to try and dream before leaving. And then briefly staying on the theme of family, I invite everyone to Google Statue of Atlas at Rockefeller Center, because that's what this next poem is about. This is Atlas. Gigantic Atlas, eldest of the brothers, goes the epigraph, knew all the depths of the sea. He ruled over a kingdom with a precipitous coastline larger than Africa and Asia put together. The land of Atlantis lay beyond the pillars of Hercules, of Heracles, actually. You wear the armillary pinpricks of heaven forever. You are faced in a true direction, north. And somehow you do not fall, do not fail. Your one foot yet to gain purchase, the other already slipping off. Your punishment is not the weight, it's forever to lack leverage. Your body argues an argument lost to time. I looked up at you as we walked into the International Building, past the cobbler, the barber, the studio for 2-inch square photograph, into the State Department passport office for my first blue book of citizenship. It's taken my life to now to discern your fate as the extinguishment of desire, that from the announcement of your sentence, every moment would be one of devotion to the warding off of total loss. Such was the fragility to their immigrants' arrival, to mine as American. Such were the stakes. With my eyes now, but remembering as a child, I look up at my mother and father, their faces a glare of spring sun. And I ask them, do you know what you've done? Are you ready? There are poems where I was inspired by other writers into the myth. One of them was for Pandora, and I was inspired by a passage from Richard Hugo. In World War II, I was a bombardier based in Italy. I was on the American side, but let me assure you, the history books are right. We won. If you had seen me bomb, you would have doubts. I was the world's worst. This is Pandora. And this is to Richard Hugo. If all you are is back in Phillipsburg, Montana, you consider that a gift. Boredom enough, but think of the quiet there too, the clarity of nothing today, nothing tomorrow. But there is or can be so much in the stillness of ruin. Regret in gray, knitted into the sky, pulled into the ground, bricked into buildings, settling into the people around you, into you. Elsewhere is the blessing of not you. You are here. Not dancing, no one is, but sitting, drinking, watching the front door open occasionally, snatch the afternoon inside. Anywhere like Phillipsburg takes you back to Italy, to 1945, to the first monstrous consequences you took responsibility for, then to your racing away since at 4-engine speed, 5 miles up, barely willing. You are grateful for cloud cover, thinking or trying to over the roar, looking at the night's payload expectant in the bomber's bay, masses of dark and what each of them, all of them would do. The one that the masses behind your eyes, that they are the winged souls waiting, and they are anxious to fly, and they belong to you. You look at your hand, you would open those doors. The next one is the one quoted in Shawn's elegant announcement for this reading for me. Heracles, epigraph from Graves. Yet while the immortal Heracles banquets at the divine table, his mortal phantom stalks about Tartarus among the twittering dead. Given such gifts in height and strength, promised land, seed, and weather, he would see the whole sky littered with his sex, his deaths, all except his own, reading his future among the hurl of stars he would say flung on his behalf. What does he accept as enough? Never sought for wisdom, his power not in self-reflection, that recklessness of his virtue when the world is new and wild. But what happens after all around him age, after the 100 bulls, the dying down of laughter and the murder of friends? He says such a life is unimaginable, to be cursed with blood boiling, his shirt taking his skin with it, the earth rending with his pain. Clearly he would take the world with him first. And so the spectacle of the pyre, the carefully placed kindling, the politic gifts ensuring immortality. Is this like love, a drifting from ideal toward greed, revealed as not as blessed, persistence through ignorance after ignorance, ending like the sky or ocean, feeling only at the end, beset with consequence? The next one is actually one of my favorites to read, The Wedding of Perseus and Andromeda. The explanatory epigraph from Graves. In the ensuing fight, Perseus struck down many of his opponents, but being greatly outnumbered, was forced to snatch the Gorgon's head from its bed of coral and turn the remaining 200 of them to stone. And this poem is told from the point of view of Andromeda. All at once the wedding party froze. 200 caught in every shove, every punch, rush toward or away this wreck of a ceremony. Cups finished falling and shattering, tables splitting and splintering, sounds trailing to turn strange and single. The air stayed rank with wine and live hot breath, but bodies and faces turned to nothing as a mountainside. Even when broken, you warned me last night the chains are still there. You are calm and holding the dead snaked head and my hand. You say these are just men. You have entreated with gods for the power of this moment. Your winged sandals, the prize of the Gorgon. You say you live as proof. I look over to the granite of my mother and father. Why couldn't you leave well enough alone, I ask? You both had your plans. You even left me for the sea, but then I met this husband of happenstance. And now you both will be thrown to the stars, and there will be nothing I can do to change their resulting unkindness. My husband and I turn to leave. I ask that before we fly, we walk slowly. The first hour of our marriage is this now quiet field. A breeze winds its way through the new statuary, the sun starting its daily work of shadow. I can see grass already sprouting at the foot of them. The later years of trees will make this place nowhere. Forgive me, I say to him. It may be too long before I feel. Shawn, do I have time for one more? So the last one I wrote around the time of the George Floyd verdict, and I focused on the notion of the four winds. Here where I am in the Northwest, it's Eurus we fear, an east wind that by September blows around our home dried to a cinder. Ashes from a million annual acres some years, a direction we orient interior, passive sins of origin and pioneer myth. Somewhere is a shore without invader, but here we welcome Zephyrus off the ocean, often potent, often gentle, blankets of snow and steady rain of miracles, inviting me to realize, what do I know about miracles? What do I know of welcoming, fear, or we? I live at the top of a hill. Most days I do little that's real. Instead, I watch trees move, I watch cycles of seasons and admire appreciative horizons. But I have learned from trees not to trust what I see, like up into their canopy and nest, fused limbs, gnarled evidence, limped or clumped together. What falls, men act, live, die, get punished, get away with it. I imagine this west wind 2,000 miles later descending into Minneapolis, acting on faces at an intersection, winding into ducts or sussing through windows, brushing someone's face inside a courtroom to at most blink at it. Anything more concrete or more lasting, that is up to all of us. The pulling of the world toward us, all of the four named winds with Boreas and Notus coming toward us, together acting in swirling concert, pushing tomorrow onto us. What will we do? What will I? Air separates a gavel in its block, a prosecutor from a defendant. Air carries pronouncements of verdict, carries voices for or against, through hallways and onto streets, into the mind, the images, the readings, history. There becomes here, and from where we live, where I, travel of significance, has nothing to do with the wind. The air, the one air that mattered, that of another breath in, of a gap between face and pavement, a miracle of unwaiting, of rising up again, for the one man to whom it mattered, that will never come. Thank you very much, everyone.
Wow. Shawn, that was fantastic. I remember when you sent the extra poem, the last one that you read, and said, can we fit this in? And I was like, oh, we have to fit that in. And hearing you read it just now was just so powerful. I love that poem. I love this collection. I love it when I get to read a collection of poetry and it makes me want to learn something more. You know, I mean, I'm not that well versed on all the mythology. I remember learning about some of the more popular ones back in school, but your poems and with the epigraphs at the beginning, giving us a little bit of a hint to the story, it just made me thirsty for more mythology. I mean, it was really a pleasure to read, and the way that you weaved these ancient tales into what's going on in our lives now was just brilliant. So thank you so much for writing this, for letting us publish it. And it was a real treat to get to hear you read them today. Thank you so much. Let's have a giant round of applause for all of our readers today. And thank you, our audience, for joining us for another edition of the Poetry Box Live. You know, as poets and authors have been impacted by the pandemic's limiting of reading venues across the country, It really means the world to us that you joined us here on a sunny day on Zoom to celebrate their poetry. Our next show will be on Saturday, June 11th, and we'll have 3 poets. Angela Hansen, author of Fence Lines, will be joining us from Nebraska. Christopher Bogart, author of This Conversation, will be reading from New Jersey. And Anne Correa, author of Late Fall Bucolics, will be joining us from Alaska. So to keep up to date on upcoming shows, new releases, and submission opportunities, please subscribe to our newsletter by going to thepoetrybox.com, where you'll find a sign-up form at the bottom of every webpage. Thanks again for joining us today. We look forward to sharing more poetry with you next month on the Poetry Box Live.
Yeah, thank you, Shawn.
Thank you all.
Thanks everyone for
Thank you,
coming.
everyone, for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.